Hello, everyone. It's Michael Jaco with Unleashing Intuition Secrets. Very special guest with us today, ThomasHaviland, retired, well, not retired, he got retired from the U.S. Air Force, major in the U.S. Air Force. He spoke out about deadly clotting side effects of COVID vaccines, long white fibrous clots, which has been suspected of causing the sudden deaths of young people and old people who have been jabbed. For that reason, Haviland stood up against President Biden's military vaccine mandate, which I couldn't believe that the military went ahead with that, but yeah, they did, and forcing the major to retire. A recent embalmer survey exposed many in the profession have seen a huge increase in the white fibrous clots inside bodies on which they have worked on. And I remember very early on, I know you have the one gentleman from the UK which spoke up very early on. I was going to have him on my show, and he and his family decided, no, we're not going to put this out anymore because we're getting a lot of pushback. So they went silent for a while and then finally came out. So I'm really happy that you're able to get these embalmers to speak out, and you've done some articles and so forth that really have revealed it. And that's what really brought us together. I saw one of your articles and it was like fantastic, all the information that you shared. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Michael, thanks for having me. And, this is what we're talking about today. These are these unusual white fibrous clots that embalmers with 20 or 30 years of experience, Michael, have never seen before until 2021 after the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines. Here's another one right here. This one here is a 5.5-inch clot, Michael. It's about half an inch wide. This particular one was taken out of the abdominal aorta. It's one of the largest blood vessels in the bodies. And the embalmers, like I said, before COVID and the vaccines, they would see two primary types of clots, what they call chicken fat clots, which are small and yellowish in color and tear very easily, and also traditional grape jelly clots. They look like just dark grape jelly, dissolve easily in your hands. Much, much different than these large white fibrous clots that are tough and rubbery. Like I said, the embalmers never saw this phenomenon before until, actually, a few of them did see it in 2020, which is interesting. This year we had COVID, but no vaccines yet. And that makes some sense because there's a spike protein on the surface of the virus itself. Yeah. And we believe that spike protein is causing these white fibrous clots to form. But then the number of embalmers that saw the phenomenon exploded in 2021 after the rollout of the vaccines. And that makes sense too, right? Because the vaccine was supposed to stay in your deltoid muscle in your upper arm, right, and produce just enough of the spike protein to elicit an immune response for just a couple days to a week. And then it was supposed to stop. That get you ready for COVID. You're all set. We know now that's not what happened at all, right? The lipid nanoparticles from that vaccine carry it all over the body. It continues to produce this spike protein, not just for a couple days to a week, but they found it producing the spike protein for months, even years after the person's last injection. So the scientists that I've talked to believe that it supercharged the formation of these white fibrous clots with a lot more spike protein coming from the vaccine.
Wow, that's incredible. And, there was one article where you said Clotastrophy.
Yeah, Clotastrophy. That's our affectionate name. It's a play on the word catastrophe. We call it a Clotastrophy, obviously. And
comments 2025 Worldwide Embalmer Blood Clot Survey. So you've been doing these for a couple of years now. What drew you?
4 years.
3 years, huh? Wow.
Four years.
Do that?
2022, 23, 24, and 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
What drew you to that initially?
Well, as you said, I was actually, I hung up my uniform. I did 20 years in the Air Force. I was on my 16th year as a defense contractor working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. And in October 2021, as you mentioned, Joe Biden's mandates came down, not just for the military and the government civilians, but also defense contractors, of which I was one.
Okay.
And I said, I'm not taking this jab because it was an experimental gene therapy. We didn't know much about it. I'd already done some research and saw it from our own CDC wasn't putting out good information, but their counterpart in the UK was. They're Public Health England, and Public Health England had a document out called SARS-CoV-2 Variants of Concern, Technical Briefing 23. It was dated 17 September of 2021. And in table 5 in that document on pages 19 and 20, it showed hundreds of thousands of cases, breakthrough cases of COVID amongst the fully vaccinated by the early fall of 2021. At the very same time that Fauci and Birx were telling us here, hey, this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated. So they were lying to us, and they knew they were lying to us. And I also knew that it violated the Nuremberg Code, right? When you're going to participate in an experiment, that needs to be voluntary, not mandatory, and the people should have what's called informed consent. For example, they should know how long the duration of the experiment is going to be. Not that we're going to give you 2 shots and then, oops, that's not going to work. We're going to have to give you endless boosters on top of it. So, and people need to know about potential side effects as well, like these white fibrous clots, turbo cancers, miscarriages, etc. So they were giving that shot blindly to people, and it was just very unethical. So I decided, Michael, that I wasn't going to take it. And a 3-star general had sent out an email to the entire base telling us the dates we had to either get the shot by or get kicked out. Mm-hmm. And he tried to guilt those of us who hadn't taken the jab yet into taking it. And I sent him back an email, Michael. I said, remember, this is a 3-star Air Force general. I said, shame on you. You failed us. Instead of standing up for our right to decide for ourselves whether or not to take an experimental drug, you chose to spend your time trying to guilt us into taking the jab. Shame on you. Nice. And I didn't just send the email to him. I CC'd all 30,000 people that work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I knew what was going to happen. I got a call from my defense contractor boss a half hour later. I was fired from my $165,000 a year job for shaming the Air Force 3-star in front of the entire base. But Michael, somebody had to do it. None of the colonels, none of the generals were pushing back on this. They were just going, they were like little tyrants themselves, just going right along with it. Yes, men.
Ah, crazy. And, for being a Navy SEAL and then working at the CIA for 35 years, both of them, we knew that the next big attack was going to be a bioweapon attack. We were already planning for it for many years, and then when we saw this coming out, we were all like, "This is it. This is it." But as time went on, we started to see there were some anomalies that didn't quite fit, and then I started calling out very early on that this is not what they have. Shown us, and there's ways you can overcome this, hydroxychloroquine, and you can make your own. That got taken down, and then all the different things that we're trying to inform people of, they kept trying to shut down, and that was an indicator that they were controlling the narrative, and they wanted this thing to get blown up out of proportion.
Yeah. In fact, the military guys that I talked to, you said the tactics they used in the military were they brought you into the commander's office by yourself. They say, hey, why aren't you getting this shot? Your rest of your guys are getting it. Why aren't you? So they tried to make you feel like you're the oddball out. They isolated you, and they used various of course Article 15s as a tactic, threatening to kick you out. And I understand there's guys and gals that have 15, 18, 19 years in, and you don't want to leave your retirement on the table, by getting kicked out for not taking the jab. So there was a lot of pressure put on people in the military to take those vaccines, unfortunately.
Yeah, there was some good pushback. We had, unfortunately, after the shot came out, Senator Ron Johnson did some surveys of the military and saw that there was catastrophes happening with people that had gotten the vaccination. That should have been all stopped for the military, but they kept pushing it. What happened? Even you have a senator that's putting this out to the press, and they still overruled it. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've met Senator Johnson a couple of times. In fact, last May, Dr. Peter McCullough asked me to come to Washington, D.C. when he testified in front of Senator Johnson and talked about the myocarditis issue. But Johnson and him also brought up the white fibrous clot issue. And when he did that, I stood up in front of the audience and held these up along with this one as well to show the entire room what we were talking about in terms of the white fibrous clots and that particular side effect. So unfortunately, though, that very few of our politicians have really, weighed in on this and supported Johnson in those efforts to unveil what's really happening. Because people are afraid to talk. According to our CDC, 80% of American adults over the age of 18 took at least the first 2 jabs. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on out there. People may not want to know the answers to these questions about what might be inside them, due to these vaccines. Yeah, that's part of the problem.
So we're building. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, when I got fired from my job, the next thing I did, Michael, is something kind of strange. I took to the streets, actually. I held a sign close to the Air Force Base for about a whole year after that incident. Yeah, from the fall of 2021 through the fall of 2022, for about 120 days, I held a big sign that said "No vaccine mandate" close to the Air Force Base at a huge intersection where there's like, a Red Lobster, a Best Buy, Lowe's, Walmart, and 4 lanes of traffic going each way, 2 turn lanes. And I probably saw about 500,000 cars go by during the 600 hours or so that I stood out there with that sign. And I'd say out of every 100 cars that went by, about 60% of the people did nothing. They did no reaction whatsoever. I call them the mushy middle. And it actually wound up, most of them actually took the vaccines.
Yeah, about 70% of America did.
Yeah. There was another 20% that loved my sign, and they honked their horn, said, "Right on, man, you should decide for yourself." But Michael, there was 20% that hated me. They said, "F you, get the shot, you're killing grandma." There's even a few that pretended to swerve their car and hit me because I was standing down close to the curb. So, and what the funny thing was, is even as we went further and further into 2022, and we learned more about the vaccines, they weren't stopping you from catching COVID or, transmitting it to others, and started hearing more about these nasty side effects, that 20% never changed. They were locked into a mass formation psychosis, and they became the little tyrants, right? The ones that told us, "Hey, put your mask on above your nose, go get the shot." Those people I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, they went full Nazi. It was sad, but it's that psychosis you talk about.
It was hard for me to do that, by the way. It was a little embarrassing the first couple of times I went down there with the sign. I never protested. I was always a good soldier. I always followed my orders of my bosses and stuff.
Sure.
In fact, my wife, she would get a few calls from her girlfriend saying, "Hey, I saw your husband down there at the corner with the sign. Is everything okay with Tom?" So, but I was just, like I said, I was trying to show support for the troops, and also, maybe get a mom or a dad or two not to jab up their kids, make them think about it before they give the injections to their kids. So, but then things changed in the fall of 2022, the week of Thanksgiving, November 2022, Michael. I watched that movie, Died Suddenly. And I'm sure you've probably seen it too. Oh, yeah. For your viewers that don't know, it's about an hour-long documentary. You can still find it on Rumble. And about half of that film is devoted to these 6 or 7 embalmers that said they were seeing these unusual white fibrous clots in their corpses. And there was an amazing statement made at the 13-minute and 15-second mark in that movie. A embalmer from the state of Indiana, Mr. Wallace Hooker, he was lecturing to a bunch of embalmers at an Ohio Embalmer Association conference in Columbus, Ohio, on the 26th of October in 2022. And he showed them photographs of these white fibrous clots that he had been pulling out of his corpses for about the last year and a half at that time. And he said, "By a show of hands, how many of you are seeing these same clots?" And he said almost the entire room of 100 embalmers raised their hands, yes.
Wow.
He then asked him, "Well, when did you start seeing them?" And they all agreed it was in the middle of 2021, about 6 months after the COVID vaccines rolled out. So whatever else happened in that movie, and I know that there were some problems in that movie with some of the footage, but whatever else happened, that statement's either true or false, right? Either those embalmers raised their hands or they didn't. So I got up the very next morning after I watched the movie. I watched it the night it premiered. And so I got up the next morning. I said, I don't think any reporter is going to chase after this story. So I called the Ohio Embalmers Association. They're located in Cincinnati, about an hour south of where I live in Dayton. I talked to their president, Mr. Dan Becker, their vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, and their secretary, Mr. David Hicks. I asked all 3 gentlemen, "Hey, did you happen to be in the room at the time those embalmers supposedly raised their hands?" Well, none of the 3 of them happened to be in the room at the time. However, the vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, who runs his own funeral home in Marysville, Ohio, about an hour north of where I live, and he does his own embalming, said, "Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too." So that was my wow moment, Michael. I now had an officer of the Ohio Embalmers Association. By the way, Woody's now the president of the Ohio Embalmers Association, corroborating these 6 or 7 embalmers in this Died Suddenly film, saying that he's seeing the clots too. So that's when I decided right away to run a nationwide survey, which I then later on turned into a worldwide survey by including Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand to see how prevalent these clots were. Because I knew that our own FDA and CDC would not be looking into this problem, right? And they haven't for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's been me and with the help of my assistant, Miss Laura Kasner, that have run these surveys for the last 4 years to see the prevalence and timing of these unusual white fibrous clots.
Yeah, it's very, very sad, how this, transpired. And it should have been a big red flag right from the beginning, but, it was something they obviously had a intention of pushing out there. And, having been in the CIA, I've seen these programs, pushed and so forth. And I started to recognize it pretty early on as well. So, yeah, I've had, a lot of people on that have talked about this over the years. There were, in the beginning, like I had, John O'Looney was going to come on my show and he backed out.
Right.
And then I put it out there, is any of these embalmers out there want to come forward and talk on my show? And, crickets. And then finally, this one gentleman from Canada came on and you contacted me and says, I'll come on and talk. And I was like, okay, great. And he said, and he was telling me how he had in Ontario and Quebec and some other places where he had multiple, funeral homes. And he said he had lots of people, and mostly the ones from Ontario were having the white fibrous clots. And I guess he was in Edmonton, somewhere around there, and they weren't having as many. I think because in that area, most people didn't get it. But he came on my show. I said, do you want to before we went on, you want to black out? Do you want me to not use your name?
Yeah.
He's like, no, I'll be
Good for
fine.
him.
Okay. And so we did the show, and within hours after we did the show, he contacted me. Can you please take that video down? I'm getting massively attacked.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I figured that would happen, but
the good news is, Michael, I have found some people who are willing to speak out and willing to speak out now. And, like I said,
that's what I love about your work. You have so many people that are finally having the courage to come forward and talk about it now. But you said just recently you're on Redacted, and I heard you say that you're not having as many people respond to your surveys as you did in the past. So maybe people are getting, well, let's just move on. And I think, no, it's not time to move on. It's getting worse. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. Over the 4 years I've done the survey, 2022 through 2025, the end of each of those years, it's been very consistent, the responses in terms of the percentage of embalmers seeing the clots. It's been about 70% to 80% of the embalmers say they are seeing the clots. And the typical percentage of corpses they're seeing the clots in is anywhere from about 20% to 30%. That's been consistent over the 4 years. The problem, like you say, is in my 2024 survey, end of year survey, that was my year I had the best responses. I had 301 responses to that survey. But then in my 2025 survey, the one I just ran about a month or so ago, that one only had 59 responses. So there was a drastic reduction. And I think part of the problem, Michael, is now like I said, these embalmers may be in a little bit of a pickle, right? Because a lot of them haven't spoken out publicly. In fact, very few have spoken out publicly. But now if they come forward and admit the clots are still happening, they probably wish they were going away. They probably are hoping that, as less and less people took the COVID vaccines, the clots would start to go away. But that's not happening. They're still prevalent. So now they're in a dilemma, because if they do come out and speak out, people say, great, I'm glad you spoke out and that you're admitting you're seeing them now. But where were you 4 or 5 years ago when you first started seeing them? So that's the dilemma they're in, right?
Wow, okay.
So, yeah. So, and this is becoming kind of the new normal. We cannot allow it to become the new normal, because it's not normal. We see a lot younger people dying these days from these clots. And like I said, there's still 10% plus excess mortality in highly COVID vaccinated countries. In fact, just yesterday I was on a site called Our World in Data, and people can go on that site and look. They have a page on excess mortality, and you can go there and they have graphs for all the countries that have data collected for death. And what they've done is they've compared the death totals to the baseline years 2015 through 2019. So excess death is anything over the average of the 2015 to 2019 years. Here in the United States, for example, we had about 3 million people die every year from 2015 through 2019. From 2020 through the present, we've had about 3.3 million people dying per year in the United States. So it's gone up 10%, 300,000 extra Americans dying every year. And and you would expect maybe to see that in the years 2020 and 2021 when COVID was hitting hard, when we had the original Wuhan variant and the Delta variant, which were more deadly. And we did see spikes, and you see spikes in all the countries. But then starting in the year 2022, after the vaccines have been rolled out for a year, you should start to see those numbers return back to zero again. There shouldn't be any excess mortality, right? Because if the vaccines are working properly and the Omicron variant's much milder, a lot of less people are dying from the Omicron variants of COVID, you should see that return back to normal. But you're not in highly vaccinated countries. In the US, you'll see that has stayed at 10% from 2022, 2023, and 2024. The 2025 numbers are not in yet. If you look at a country like South Africa, though, where you had very little uptake of the COVID vaccines, you'll see the large spikes in 2020 and 2021 of excess mortality those years. But then in 2022 through 2024, it's back to zero again. They've had no problems the last 3 or 4 years with excess mortality in South Africa, which has had low uptake of the COVID vaccines. So that should tell the audience something, right? Yeah. It tells us that probably this extra 10% that we're seeing in highly vaccinated countries is due to the vaccine. And when people say, well, I don't see that in my own daily life, I get that because it's subtle at the individual level. 10% excess mortality means you might see 11 people die this year as opposed to 10 dying last year. Well, are you really going to notice 11 people dying this year versus 10 last year? Probably not, right? But that is 10% excess mortality. So, but when you aggregate those numbers up to mass populations, like the whole country, you get 300,000 extra Americans dying every year. That's why it's happening. And it's been happening for the last 4 or 5 years, but it's subtle at the individual level.
Yeah, and so this was I mentioned this in the show that I did, where the percentage, if you take the percentage of the people that actually been vaccinated, and the numbers of people that are showing up in like for instance, John O'Looney, fortunately has spoken out. Also, Richard Hirschman.
Mm-hmm. I know both.
They said they report that they are still seeing the white fibrous clots in 35 to 40% of their corpses at the end of 2025. And then your Laura's and my 2024 survey actually showed a slight increase in the percentage of courses with the white fibrous clots to 27% when compared to the 20% in 2023 survey. So do you think these numbers are going to continue to increase? And if we take those numbers and we, correlate them into the U.S. population, that's probably, unfortunately, has these white fibrous clots, we're looking at somewhere around, close to 100 million people that might have to be walking around with these white fibrous clots.
Yeah, I can't say it's that much, and it's hard to determine what percentage are in the living. Sure. But you're right. In the dead, it's average. I don't think it's going to increase. It's staying pretty steady between 20 to 30%. And like I said, I took I was actually invited last June of 2025 to be a guest speaker at the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association's annual convention. Their president at that time, Mr. Taylor Moore, said, "Hey, Tom, I want you to come talk to our embalmers because we're scared. We're into year 5 of this now, and these things aren't stopping. So we want you to come." So I went there and I gave an hour presentation. I also took a survey, an in-person survey while I was there. By the way, I also captured on video, Michael, 18 of 28 embalmers in that room with raised hands saying they were still seeing the clots in the first half of 2025. Mm-hmm. So just further proof this phenomenon is happening. You don't have to believe me. You can go look at that video and you can see the 18 embalmers with raised hands saying they're seeing the clots. By the way, also in addition to Mr. Woody Wilson and Taylor Moore, who's the president of the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association, Mr. Kevin Swire, who's the president of the Manitoba, Canada Funeral Association, says that he's seen the clots. Mr. Chris Calvi Jr., who is the 2024-2025 president of the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association, says he's seen the clots. Mr. Dana Goodell, who's a board member of the Iowa Funeral Directors Association, currently says that he's seen the clots. He actually did a video with another gentleman where they talk about the clots. So we have a lot of well-respected men in the community saying these are definitely happening. Mm-hmm. And also I was contacted in March of 2024, Michael, by a endovascular specialist and cardiologist in Jacksonville, Florida, Dr. Mahana Basharat, who admits he's been pulling these same white fibrous clots out of living people for the last 5 years in what's called a cath lab, where he uses flexible catheters that either suck the clot out, scrape it out, or lasso it and pull it out. He actually sent me an email with a photo of a deep vein thrombosis. Let's see if I can put it up here on the screen. Don't know how well. See that there? Yep. Oh, there, that red clot there. When that's a white fibrous clot that after you wash the blood off, that pinkish cord running down through the middle, that will turn white. And this was actually a deep vein thrombosis was removed from a gentleman's leg. And you can see the angiograms also of what it looked like when it was still in the leg. And then the middle image there where you see the kind of the dark stream running vertically, that's the blood flow that's been restored after the clot was removed. So that was a successful procedure by Dr. Basharat on this particular gentleman. And he also sent me several other photos of white fibrous clots removed from the iliac artery and then from a dangerous pulmonary embolism up in the lungs area. Those they're very dangerous, have to be removed very carefully. All three of those contain white fibrous material. But unfortunately, Michael, after about a month after he made contact with me, he sent me an email saying, "Tom, I've been instructed to terminate communications immediately. Sorry for the inconvenience." So somebody, his administrator at his hospital, got to him, says, "Shut up. Don't talk about this publicly, right? Or else we're going to come after your license. We'll take away your board certifications." So they threatened him into silence, which is unfortunate, right? Because these doctors, unlike the embalmers, they do have access to the COVID vaccination records of all their patients. They can tell you how many shots they took, when they took their shots, what brand they took. I actually tried to run a cath lab worker survey, blood clot survey, similar to the ones I ran with the embalmers. And I sent that, Michael, to the Societies for Vascular Surgery in the US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, also to 120 vascular surgeons directly across the United States. Guess how many of them took my survey? 0. None.
0.
The doctors don't want to talk about it at all. Yeah.
God, see, that's the problem. We could
an email back from the Society for Vascular Surgery in the United States. They're headquartered in Rosemont, Illinois, and they brag on their website of having over 6,300 member vascular surgeons all across the United States. Wow. None of them wanted to take the survey. So I said, well, if I can't get good information from the doctor end, maybe I can get from the patient end. So in 2024, I ran a people's blood clot survey with the help of Clayton Morris and his wife, Natalie, on Redacted, and also Dr. John Campbell, the old gentleman in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
They displayed a QR code for me, and I ran a people's blood clot survey. And guess what, Michael? In less than 2 weeks, I got over 1,400 responses from people all over the world happy to talk about their blood clotting issues. So the patients were happy to talk about it, even though the doctors are staying silent. And in that survey, what's interesting is one of the questions I asked is, what years did you have your blood clotting issue? And in the year 2020, which is the year we had the virus, but no vaccines yet, only 79 of the 1,400 people said they had the blood clotting issue that year. But then starting in year 2021, it jumped to over 500 people per year having blood clotting issues in 21, 22, 23, and 24. Far different than the 79 so in 2020. So that tells me which one's the culprit, right? It's not the virus so much as it is the vaccine.
Right.
Because that's when the bars
exploded. The virus itself was causing spiking initially as well. And, that's why you have a little bit of, uptick in the beginning. But the real culprit, as we're learning, is the actual shot. Now, I've had Bryant Artis on. I've worked with him quite a bit. I've been to, we've done shows together. I've met him. He's talked about the venom within the vaccine. So there could be other aspects of the vaccine that could be causing the problems. We get the, of course, white fibrous clotting, but there could be other things that are not showing up, once someone's deceased, that's causing, people to actually die, higher rates of cardiovascular problems, cancers, and so forth.
We think we have a pretty good handle on this issue. Hirschman and I have been working with a gentleman named Mr. Greg Harrison. He's an organic chemist in Sydney, Australia. And he leads a team of scientists at several universities and other locations in Australia and in Europe. And they've done a whole battery of tests on the white fibrous clots. Hirschman has sent samples to laboratories all over the world under both formaldehyde and under argon gas as well, because argon is an inert gas, so it keeps the specimen from reacting to anything. And what they've done is they've done a whole battery of tests, Michael. One of them is called inductive coupled plasma mass spectrometry, ICP-MS. And that particular one tests for the elements that are in the clots, and elements from the periodic table. And what's interesting is when the results of that came back, they mirrored, by the way, the first person to do that was Mike Adams, the health ranger. I don't know if you remember Mike. Yeah. And they verified Mike was right. His results were accurate. The clots contain very little amounts of potassium, magnesium, or iron, which are in high amounts in normal blood, right? So we knew this wasn't blood clotting. It wasn't blood congealing, right? Now, conversely, the white fibrous clots contain very high amounts of phosphorus, sulfur, and sometimes tin, which is interesting, right? So, and by the way, there was a lot of phosphorus and phosphates and sulfates in the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. Yeah. Just a hint. So another test that was done was called high-performance liquid chromatography, which tests the compounds that are in the clots. And our fibrinogen is one of the main components. So fibrinogen is actually a protein produced by us. It's in our own bodies. It's in everybody's bodies, produced by the liver, and it's in a liquid form in your blood plasma. Then whenever you have a cut on your arm, it triggers the clotting response and the conversion of that liquid fibrinogen that's in your plasma into a white solid called fibrin. And what they found in the clot using the HPLC, the high performance liquid chromatography test, was typically when our fibrin strand forms, if 3 fibrinogen chains are used to form that. There's an alpha, beta, and gamma chain. And you can think of them as 3 smaller ropes, and they kind of intertwine to become a larger, stronger rope, right? And they were usually in a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio in a normal clot. Well, in the white fibrous clots, they found the fibrinogen beta chain was 36% of the clot, the gamma chain was 16% of the clot, and the alpha chain was only 4% of the clot. So it was a bizarre 9-to-4-to-1 ratio instead of a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. Also, an enzyme that's usually present in the conversion of fibrinogen into fibrin is called thrombin. And they found almost no thrombin in the clot. So that told them that something else was driving the reaction. And that something else is phosphorus. Like I said, phosphorus coming from 2 things. Coming from both the phospholipid nanoparticles that they're using in the vaccine, the little hollow balls of fat that they put the mRNA from the vaccine inside in order to get it into your cells, right? What's happening, Michael, is at the moment that phospholipid nanoparticle gets inside your cell, it has to open up to release the mRNA payload inside, right? That's going to start producing the spike protein. When it opens up, it's exposing phosphorus heads on that phospholipid nanoparticle. And that has a great affinity. It wants to bind with our natural fibrinogen. So that's what's going on. And it causes that fibrinogen then to twist and misfold and become these clots. I'll show the audience a photo here. This is a photograph. On this side, you see these kind of smoother, what looks like smooth cooked spaghetti noodles. Yeah. This figure, by the way, came out of a peer-reviewed paper that appeared in Nature in August of 2024 by Ruin colleagues, RYU and colleagues. And what it's showing is that's what your fibrinogen looks like normally when it converts into fibrin. When you look on the other side over here, you see it looks much nastier, doesn't it? This is what happens when the fibrinogen comes in contact with the spike protein, either from the virus or from the vaccine. It becomes all twisted, misfolded, and gets these nasty nodules on it. Now, if you look on this side here, this is a photograph of a white fibrous clot that Richard Hirschman sent to a neuroscientist in Japan named Kevin McCarran. Kevin took a thin 5 micrometer slice of one of Hirschman's clots taken out of a cadaver, and he looked at it under a high-powered scanning electron microscope at a magnification of 5,000, and this is what he saw. Now, does that look more like the nice smooth spaghetti noodles, or does it look like the matted, misfolded, twisted mess with the nasty nodules on it?
Definitely. Yeah.
It's the latter. So that's proof at the microscopic level that the spike protein from both the virus and the vaccine are causing our natural blood clotting protein fibrinogen to twist and misfold. And then we have an enzyme called plasmin. It can break down the nice smooth spaghetti noodle clots very easily, but it cannot break down those masted, twisted mess, of a clot. So then that's when these things tend to grow and persist and become these humongous white fibrous clots. So we have proof at the eyeball level of what's happening. We have proof at the microscopic level. This is what's happening. To me, it's a slam dunk, Michael. And it's a shame that our own CDC, FDA, and that university labs around the world have not looked at this at all, right? They have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. They could be doing the same kind of research that this ragtag team that's using their own money has been doing for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. You guys have been doing that. So fantastic. I had no idea that we were actually producing in our own bodies, the thing of our demise. So it was activating it within our own bodies. So that makes so much sense.
Right. It's taking our own fibrinogen and it's twisting it into this bizarre polymer instead of its normal fiber.
Yeah, exactly. So, geez. So they're going to resist this, it looks like, until they're started. Do you think anybody's going to be held accountable at some point?
Boy, it's hard to say yes at this point, isn't it, Michael? Because we're 5 years into this, and nobody seems to go to jail for anything, do they? Fauci got a preemptive pardon. That was bizarre, wasn't it? He hadn't even supposedly committed a crime, yet Biden gave him a pardon anyways, preemptively. Strange.
Well, it was with the auto pen, so maybe it's not going to be held.
Here's the scary thing: is that the big pharma's not stopping, are they? They're going to continue to produce other.
This is a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, new vaccines for other ailments, right? For RSV, the regular flu, shingles. They want to use the same mRNA technology in this phospholipid nanoparticle delivery system for all their future drugs. And I and others like Dr. Peter McCullough were saying, no, this is not ready for prime time. In fact, this should probably be thrown into the waste bin of history because the whole technology's failed, Michael. Like I said, they can't control where it goes. They said it was going to stay on your deltoid muscle. No, it goes all over the body. They can't even control the dosage amount because some people continue to produce spike protein for months to years after they get the shot when it was supposed to turn off in just a couple of days to a week. And about 10% of the time with these COVID shots, it's not even producing the spike protein, the correct spike protein, which is dangerous enough in and of itself. About 10% of the time it's producing what's called nonsense or aberrant proteins of various lengths that our bodies also attack because it's foreign to the body, right? It's attacking. So it's messing up, it's destroying people's immune systems. And I implore people, even if they've taken a few shots, don't take any more because there is a cumulative effect. The more shots you take, the more you introduce the mRNA and the spike protein in your body. And that's bad. That's bad news.
Well, I've had this one on my show. She was basically making sure that the vaccines as they came out were good, and they put them under certain lights and so forth, and they started to see the luciferase type stuff, and she brought that to the attention of her higher ups, and they pretty much shut her down and ran her off, and she went through legal challenges afterwards, and fortunately she was able to overcome that. She had a really good legal guy that I've had on my shows as well. But this seems to be something they planned. What are your thoughts on that?
At first I thought it was just a money grab, but I think that basically the virus itself, I believe, is a culmination not just of Chinese technology, but of Russian and USA technology over the last 50 years. Wow. The Russians have been well documented that they've been working on clotting agents for decades. The Chinese and Americans, in the meantime, have been working on viruses that can more easily escape the immune system and replicate faster. So we believe that SARS-CoV-2, the virus, was a best of because it has all the blood clotting issues, as well as the ability to evade the immune system, as well as the ability to replicate faster. And unfortunately, that spike protein, the most damaging part of that virus, got completely translated into the mRNA vaccines. And you wonder about, shouldn't they have known that? There's those of us who believe that there were people that did know that and still allowed it to happen anyways. So, and you think that, okay, we'll give you some grace when the vaccines first came out and people started seeing all these nasty side effects, you would have thought that they would have, okay, we're going to pull them from the market now. This isn't working. This is killing and injuring too many people. But they didn't do that, did they? They doubled down. So that's when you have to start thinking, well, maybe there is something in this depopulation thing, because why are they continuing on with this when we have shown them proof after proof that these things are injurious, to the population? It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I've having been in the CIA and seen the other side of things. Unfortunately, there's good people in the CIA. I was one of them. We did great things. We hunted down terrorists and got them off this, took them out. Osama bin Laden being one of them that I was involved with. But it's you see stuff like this, and it's very concerning. So there's these groups. It seemed like they're hell bent on like we're talking about depopulation. Who knows what that's all about, why they do that, and so forth. But yeah, they should have pulled this off long ago. Now, also in your study and your article, you were talking about how you're saying that other products are using the mRNA technology. One person that had not had the COVID vaccination was doing something for another problem that he had, disease or whatever, and he was getting vaccinations or for that. And it turned out he got the white fibrous clots and had never gotten the COVID shot. So you're right. It is starting to go into everything else now.
Yeah, scary. And, I don't know where we go from here. One of the other areas that we have to be concerned about are these bioweapons labs. These bio labs are all over the world. I was just running some numbers yesterday. Let me take a look here. It says as of 2023, there were 51 operating biosafety level 4 labs, the highest security labs for the deadliest pathogens across 27 countries, Michael. And these are the facilities that treat high-risk pathogens with no readily available vaccines or treatments, such as Ebola, Marburg, Lassa viruses. And these are the ones where you see people in the suits. They're in a space suit working with these things. Mm-hmm. Then on top of that, not only are those 51 of those labs, there's thousands of BSL level 1 through 3 labs. And we've got some data recently from Greg Harrison and his team that they may be working on some of these viruses as dangerous as Nipah virus. We were lucky with COVID because SARS-CoV-2, the virus that we dealt with for the last 4 or 5 years, had only had a case fatality rate of about 0.3%. In other words, 3 out of every 1,000 people that got COVID, the virus would die from it. And I know there was polls early on, people saying, what percentage of people are dying from COVID? And when you caught COVID, there was actually only a 2% chance that you would actually have to be hospitalized by COVID. They did polls early on amongst Republicans and Democrats. And I think some of the Democrats, they guessed that as much as 50% of people who caught COVID had to be hospitalized in the early days. That wasn't true. That wasn't true. And you don't blame them because, the TV was just trying to scare everybody, right? The actual percentage was only 2%. Only 2% of people that caught COVID, even in those early days, ever got hospitalized for it. And of that 2%, only about 1 out of 7 actually passed away from COVID. So that's about 0.3%. Like I said, 3 out of every 1,000 people. But there's viruses out there, and they're rare, like Ebola. Another one's called Nipah, Nipah, Nipah virus. Michael, that particular virus has a lethality rate of 40 to 70%.
Yeah, I saw that.
And we think that they may be working on ways to make that spread more easily amongst humans, to do gain-of-function research on that. Could you imagine what happens if Nipah, a man-made altered gain-of-function Nipah virus, escapes a lab, a BSL-4 lab or BSL-3 lab, and then starts to propagate across the planet? 40 to 70% lethality is a lot different than 0.3%, right? We would have a catastrophe. This is the danger of what's happening now with these 51 bioweapons labs and these other thousands of lower level labs. It's scary.
So I remember October of 2019, I was seeing some, because after having been in, SEAL teams, going after, bioweapons and weapons of mass destruction, and of course, doing the same thing in the CIA, we're always hunting them. That was one of the major things that we did. And when I saw in October of 2019 some anomalies that were starting to happen in China, I was like, this looks like there's going to be some problems here. And then in January of 2021, I really started beating the drum. This is something we really need to be concerned about. So do you think they're going to? I do. Do you think they're going to like release something even more deadly? Because it seems to be their mission in life. Now, remember Tulsi Gabbard, did the, emergency, Ukraine, they're got the bioweapon labs in Ukraine, and Mitt Romney came after her, called her a traitor. And then eventually, because she's got a background in, intel with, National Guard and so forth. She was
Right.
intel. So she knew something. And so she's sounding the alarm, and Mitt Romney tried to shut her down, and the press tried to shut her down. And then eventually the military came out and said, she's right. So, we had somebody in the military, you tried to sound the alarm, but, and I tried to sound the alarm, but there's obviously some people out there that are trying to do the right thing. What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, it's just hard to predict what's going to happen in the future because, unfortunately, the last 4 years I've done these surveys. My assistant and I've done these SurveyMonkey surveys. By the way, when we did the surveys, we sent it out to 50 national, regional, and state funeral director associations all over the world, each with hundreds of members. We also sent it to 1,700 funeral homes around the world directly in major cities, using a bottom-up and a top-down and a bottom-up approach to try to get the maximum number of responses. But every year I've had the results done, Michael, I've sent those in immediately to the NIH, CDC, and FDA. Crickets for 4 years. They've never responded once to any of my embalmer surveys. So, you get to be discouraged after a while that your politicians are going to do anything productive about this.
Yeah.
Now, over this last weekend, I was put in contact with somebody who's pretty close to RFK Jr., who's head of our HHS. And he asked me to write up a 2-page summary of the results of my surveys with some links to things. And I did that, and I sent it to him yesterday. So he promised to put that in front of Bobby Kennedy. So we'll see. And Bobby already knows about the clots, by the way, because early on, he had about a half hour to 45-minute conversation with embalmer Richard Hirschman. So he knows about all the clots. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya knows about him as well. I actually called Jay. I have Jay's home phone number. He's the head of the NIH. I called Jay up last August and had a conversation with him just to make sure he was aware of the fact that I had just gotten back from Tennessee, where that whole organization, the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association, admitted that they were seeing the clots, and he said, "Yeah, I know about the clots, Tom." He had been put in touch with Dr. Ryan Cole, the pathologist from Idaho. Hirschman's actually sent clots to Cole, and Cole was one of the very early ones to take a look at the composition of the clots and predict they were made out of amyloid, which is just a fancy term for a misshaped or misfolded protein, like I showed earlier. So our politicians are aware of it, but you just wonder if they're going to do anything about it. So I think Hirschman and I and others that have been dealing with this for the last 4 or 5 years, we believe we have to win the battle from the bottom up, from the people up. And going on shows like yours is the best way to do it, to inform the public. And the good news is, Michael, we are winning, because very few people are taking the shots these days. In fact, I was looking at an article the other day. It was a study actually that came out of University of New York and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is kind of ironic because that's where Ralph Barrick and them worked on the virus. But this one was more favorable. This is that you're actually surveying people, especially women of childbearing years, for their perceptions of the COVID vaccine. And they surveyed 1,600 women of reproductive age, and they asked them, do you agree with this statement? The COVID vaccine is safe to receive during pregnancy. Out of the 1,600 women of reproductive age that answered, only 199 of them, Michael, 12%, said they agreed with that statement.
Good.
So 88 of them were either uncertain or disagreed with it. Another question they asked them, or statement, they said, do you agree with this? the COVID vaccine reduces the risk of severe disease from COVID-19 during pregnancy. And of that one, only 152 agreed with that one, only 9%. So 91% of them either were uncertain or disagreed with that statement. And it turned out that of the 1,600 women in this study, about 97% of them had been COVID vaccinated. So these are women that had taken a couple of shots and then they changed their minds. They'd say, you know what, I'm not taking any more of these shots. So they answer the questions, but so Americans are getting it, right? They're catching on. The shots don't stop you from catching COVID or transmitting to others. They probably know either from themselves or friends or family, somebody that's been injured by the jabs. They said, I'm staying away from these now. So we're winning on that battlefront. And also governments are starting to acknowledge things too, right? Last fall we had, just before I think Thanksgiving, Vinay Prasad, who was one of the gentlemen in the FDA. They had an internal memo that admitted that the shots had injured children. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then, and most recently, Canada just came out. They had they were looking at their vaccine injury program, and they just took over. The Canadian government just took over direct control of their vaccine injury support program that they farmed it out to a company called Oxaro, Oxaro, and they had given this company $50 million to help distribute to COVID-19 vaccine injury victims. And it turned out that the Oxaro only had distributed 18 million of the 50 million to those people. They kept 33 million for themselves in administrative costs. So that's how important. And the Canadian government recognizes they've actually have claimed from about 10,000 Canadians who have been severely injured by the vaccine. So they said, you know what, we're going to take over this program now and take it out of the hands of this company that's wasting the money and, in administrative costs and basically taking all the profits and not giving the money to the injured victims. So we're starting to see governments maybe quietly turn around and start admitting, we were at fault for pushing those jabs, making people get them with mandates. And they don't want to come out right out and say it, but, tacitly or subtly, they're coming out and they're doing things to show the public that I think there's regret there.
Yeah, but there's some instances because, the trucker convoy in Canada, boy, they hammered everybody on that hard. And then, everybody spoke up. I've had pastors on my show that spoke out about it. And they said that they just came down hard on them. And then recently they had all those ostriches that, seems to be, they have this amazing ability to withstand, these diseases. And they went in and, culled them all.
Slaughtered them, didn't they? Oh,
yeah.
That was horrible. The video was horrible.
Absolutely. So I don't know about Canada, and maybe they just throw us a bone occasionally like that. And, or maybe they have to cover, or maybe it's part of the cover up, like we're talking about, they just keep this under wraps, keep it down low until the next big virus comes out, like this Nipah that's, I was just reading where it's an outbreak in Bangladesh and India of this Nipah that's like you're talking about has 40 to 70%.
I think there's only a couple cases right now in India, but if this thing does get out of control, that's what makes you worried, right? If they were actually trying to do gain of function research on that thing in a biolab, that's not good.
So and that's one of this is the beauty of us, speaking out about this, because we're the ones that really are calling attention to these things. I remember when the monkey virus came out, I was like, that's complete BS. Don't worry about that. And sure enough, it just kind of went away. They try to make it into a big deal. But the thing that I'm concerned about is something like Nipah comes out, because a lot of people are like, I will never shut down again. I will never, you still have to be aware that, this world can be affected. You look at the plagues in the past, you have to still be aware these things can come down, whether they're manufactured or not. You still have to be aware.
By the way, we're still concerned about the white fibrous clots and about the microclotted blood that surrounds them. In addition to the white fibrous clots, we've been tracking another phenomenon the embalmers have been seeing for the last 4 or 5 years called microclotting. They don't describe it as that. They describe it as what looks like coffee grounds or dirty blood, as they're trying to get the blood out of the corpse and put the formaldehyde in to preserve the body for a funeral showing, they run into what looks like coffee grounds in the blood draining off the corpse. And this is indication of another phenomenon called microclotting, which can be just as dangerous as these white fibrous clots. We think these things are causing strokes and heart attacks by completely blocking blood vessels. Microclotting occurs in your small blood vessels, your capillaries, and it can block the exchange of oxygen at the lungs, and then the carrying that oxygen to all the major organs of your body, including your brain, your eyes. That's why a lot of people may be suffering from brain fog or poor vision problems. They may have microclotting going on inside their head. And the embalmers the last 4 years have consistently seen that phenomenon in about 20 to 30% of their corpses as well, just like the white fibrous clots. Yeah. Richard Hirschman said, it's one of his favorite phrases is, Tom, the blood has changed. Since 2021, the blood has changed. He told me he used to see unusual blood in maybe 10 to 15% of his corpses prior to COVID. Now, and normal blood in 85 to 90% of his corpses. Now it's totally flipped. He only sees normal blood in about 10 to 15% of his corpses. He sees abnormal blood in about 85% of his corpses when you count in both the microclotting and the white fibrous clots. So and that's been corroborated in some studies that have come out last year. Dr. Risa Pretorius, who we're also working with, she's in South Africa, and she's been looking at microclotting as well. And they did a study, and they actually looked at long COVID patients and compared them to what they called healthy individuals. And they did tests where they looked at their microclotting levels in 1 milliliter of blood. And even the healthy people in the study all had at least a little bit of microclotting in their blood, which is kind of scary, right? Because that probably came from COVID, or it could have come from shedding from a vaccinated person. But their typical number of microclots was somewhere well less than from anywhere from like 1,000 to about 8,000 microclots per milliliter, which sounds pretty high, but it's not when you compare it to the people that have had that they had long COVID symptoms and probably long vax symptoms as well. Those people had an average of 72,000 microclots per milliliter of blood. The break point appears to be around the 8 to 10,000 microclots per milliliter mark. Anything below 8,000, the person tends to be asymptomatic, not have any problems whatsoever. When it gets over 10,000, especially when it gets up in the 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 level, that's when people start to have major symptoms associated with, the microclotting at that level. And then those microclots, what they have is they aggregate eventually, and they become these white fibrous clots. They start off as microclots, then they gather, aggregate, and become these white fibrous clots. So
it's just an early phase and it advances to the white. Do you think there's mutations that are going out there, Tom, with all these, with the vaccination? Do you think people are starting to mutate mRNA and causing more serious problems?
There's Nicholas Holscher, who worked with Dr. Peter McCullough at the McCullough Foundation. They recently they had a case where they verified this gentleman that they're from all the DNA plasmids and the dirtiness of the Pfizer vaccine, and also have the SV40 promoter sequence in it that causes cancer. They saw that it appears that mRNA vaccine has reverse transcribed into the DNA of that individual. So that's a case, yeah. So that's I think the first case that I am aware of where they've documented that the mRNA and the DNA from the Pfizer vaccine can reverse transcribe and become part of somebody's DNA. Now, there was another study that came out last year out of Israel where they took a look at 22 pregnant women. And I think I mentioned this when I was on Clayton Morris's Redacted show.
Yeah, this is a great point about shedding. Yeah, please.
Yeah. 16 of those 22 women had taken several doses of Pfizer, and they found the mRNA from the vaccine in both their blood and placenta anywhere from 25 days to 250 days after their last vaccination. So that again tells you Fauci and Birx were lying to us, right? They said that shot would leave you in 2 days to a week. Well, no. And they also told you it would only stay in your upper arm, So they lied on 2 counts. It goes to the family jewels, to a woman's placenta, and it also can stay in your body as much as 250 days after your last injection.
Yeah,
The shocking thing was
that hadn't had vaccinations, or partners did.
yes, that's the shocking thing. In 6 of the women who had not been vaccinated, they found the mRNA from the vaccine in 3 of them, in half of those women's blood. So, which is an indication that they probably got it from their partner. Their partner who got them pregnant was probably COVID vaccinated, right? And then So
well,
this
you can see that happening through, sex, transmitted through the sex act. But do you think that's happening with, maybe saliva, kissing, or, just breathing on someone?
absolutely possible. Yes. Wow. Dr. Scott Marsland, who's a medical partner of Dr. Pierre Corey, they run a long COVID long vax clinic as well. He came out several years ago and talked about one of the, I think, classic cases you'd have to think about is if you were in a car with a person who had been recently vaccinated for COVID. Let's say it's a cold day and you're got all the windows rolled up and they're just recirculating the air in that car. That person, through their exosomes, could be shedding on you with either the mRNA, or spike protein in the exosomes. Now, they have said in their own practice.
I remember in the early stages where everybody's getting vaccinated, I wasn't, and they were allowing us. I was in Florida at the time, and they're allowing people to go out and mingle again. I went to the gym, so I work out all the time, and I knew that I was getting something shedding on me because I would start getting some symptoms. I'd up my dose of vitamin C and other products that I use. But I strongly felt, and I have friends that told me that they're around. They had friends. They told them, don't get vaccinated because you're going to shed on me, and they're like, oh, you're ridiculous. And their periods went from a few days to like a whole month. So
absolutely, you're absolutely right, Michael. And you're not uncommon. There's a lot of people out there that have a sensitivity to that. They actually can tell you when they're in a room with vaccinated people. They can smell it. They can sense it with their smell. Okay. The good news is from Corey and Marsland is that those that are shed on typically have symptoms that are less severe than those that have taken the injections directly. That makes sense, right? Because you're not getting nearly the same strength of dose as you are when it's injected into your bloodstream from the vaccine. So not to say that people that are shed on can't have some problems that are debilitating, but it's less rare than those that have taken the vaccine.
Yeah. And, there's all these chats out there, or what I'm hearing is, if non-vaccinated, they want to like hook up with people that are non-vaccinated. And then, of course, have blood transfusions from and the hospitals don't play with that. The hospitals, for the most part, is like, if I want non-vaccinated blood, and they don't honor that. So people are getting blood transfusions from people that have been vaccinated. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm in contact with Mr. Clinton Ohlers, who's a representative for the Safe Blood Company, and that's exactly what they do. They match unvaccinated recipients of blood with unvaccinated donors. And one of the things that Clinton told me recently that I thought was interesting is there's even COVID vaccinated people now that are going in for surgeries that want to get unvaccinated blood because they don't want to get any more spike protein damage than they already have. So there's people so thank goodness there's a service for that. But you're right. Sometimes the hospitals play very difficult with that, and they make you feel unsure about whether you're going to be able to get your own blood if you're able to donate ahead of time for an operation that is coming up in a month or two. That's probably the best way to do it. Or if there's an emergency comes up, can you get blood from an unvaccinated donor? They hesitate, and they try to tell you, oh, there's nothing wrong with the blood supply. That's all screened beforehand. I don't think so. I think there was a problem with our national blood supply.
Yeah, I've heard reports of mothers that made the hospital promise that they wouldn't give vaccinated blood to their children that were getting operated on. They did anyway, and their children end up passing from it. So I mean, how do you go back and claim something like that? You can't, because these hospitals are covering all this stuff up.
Yeah, they stick to as long as they stick to their protocol, then you can't sue them. That was the problem during the 2020 and 2021 as well. Remember, the protocol was if you got COVID, they told you to go home until it got too severe. Then when you finally came in on like day 7 or day 8 and you're really bad, then they put you on remdesivir, the kidney killer, and then put you on a ventilator. And the ventilators, by the way, didn't work at all. The reason they didn't work is because the problem wasn't people being able to get air into their lungs. The problem was on the other side of the lung wall with the microclotting going on, with the blood not being able to pick up that oxygen and then carry it to the rest of the body. So, so they could pump in all the air they wanted to. It wasn't going to help the people because the problem was on the other side of the lung wall where the exchange was taking place with your red blood cells of oxygen. So they totally got that wrong, Yep.
And they'll never admit that, of course, because they were making money off that. People came in with COVID and they were like, making money. The hospitals were. So, yeah, it's like you're talking about, less than 2% or 2% of people actually die from COVID. It's kind of like the flu, bad case of the flu year, which is pretty much manufactured to be like that, I believe. And, they just bumped up the numbers by, you got some problems breathing, come into the hospital, we'll take care of you. And they took care of people. Like massive numbers of people died from remdesivir and, the breathing tubes and stuff forth.
Yeah. And the money thing was a factor, by the way, because in this interview that this Mr. Dana Goodell, who's as a board member of the Iowa Funeral Directors Association, he does about a half-hour interview with a Mr. Bob Sennett, another funeral director and embalmer from Iowa. And he tells the story of a woman whose husband passed away, supposedly from COVID. And she's asking Dana at the funeral home, she said, "Have you gotten the death certificate for my husband yet?" He said, "No, it hadn't come in yet." And she was curious because she wanted to know if COVID was going to be listed as a cause of death on the death certificate. Because if it was, she knew she'd be getting a free $7,500 from the government to help pay for the funeral expenses for her husband. Well, it finally came in, the death certificate did, and it did not say COVID on it. It said basically just myocardial infarction, heart attack. And she and the family were all upset. But that story, it's a good story because it shows you the fraud that was happening. Hospitals were getting paid to list the deaths as COVID because they were making thousands of dollars when there was a COVID death. And then the families of the deceased also were happy if it was listed as COVID because they would be getting that $7,500 free from the government. And then, of course, the funeral homes are happy because they know they're going to get paid $7,500, as well. So it was a lot of incentive to misidentify people who may have died from the vaccine or some other cause completely, but to list it as COVID instead because everybody got money.
Yeah. And here's a quote from one of the nurses in our group. Remdesivir, run, death is near, puts them in renal failure. So sad. Yeah. So very, very, sad. All of this, so many people really died from COVID and how many people died from, the vaccinations and then people going to the hospital doing remdesivir and, geez, are we ever going to get our arms wrapped around with the numbers?
I don't know. And part of the problem is it was not only we had an epidemic of the virus and the damage done by the vaccines these last 5 years, 6 years, we also had an epidemic of cowardice, Michael. Like I said, not only are these embalmers and funeral directors don't want to speak out, but the doctors, as I mentioned earlier, they don't want to talk about it. And we have proof that it's happening. For example, in my 2023 survey I ran that year, my best participant was the state of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association. We sent the email with the link to the Survey Monkey survey. Like I said, it only takes about 3 or 4 minutes to take. And I sent to Miss Allison Hinkle, their secretary. I said, "Allison, would you please forward this out to all your active embalmers across the state so they can take the survey?" And I know she did that because the next 2 days, Michael, I got 125 responses from embalmers in that one state alone, from Pennsylvania. Wow. So that's, yeah. But unfortunately, I sent that same email out to 29 other U.S. state funeral director associations and didn't get that kind of response. So what's that tell you? They probably deleted my email, right? They didn't send it down to their embalmers to take. And it tells you a couple things. First of all, it tells you the embalmers, they want to tell you, I think, what they're seeing in their embalming rooms, but if and only if they think they have their permission of either their funeral director boss at their funeral home or their state funeral director association. Because they were, like I said, they were happy to share. But like I said, if they don't think they have that, then it's silence, right? And it also told me that I think a lot of these funeral director associations and funeral directors, they didn't want their embalmers to take the survey. probably because they mandated their embalmers and the rest of the staff of their funeral home take the COVID vaccines, right? Would you want to participate in a survey that might show a link between the COVID vaccines and these white fibrous clots and the microclotting if you had mandated all your employees take the shots?
Yeah.
You'd be setting yourself up for liability suit, right? If one of your people gets injured.
Same with the hospitals and the doctors. Yeah, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. God, it's so sad, all of this. But Tom, your work is phenomenal, bringing this, to the public like this. I haven't seen any work like this anywhere, and I've been looking, since the beginning. You and your group are the only ones that are really, getting this stuff out there. So thanks so much for this.
And the shame of it was it really wasn't that hard, right? It was just being a good reporter, answering the questions: who, what, where, when, why, how. And then, for the embalmers, basically, what are you seeing? When did you see it? And how much are you seeing? What percentage of your corpses are you seeing these phenomena in? Those are the main questions I've been asking them the last, 4 years. And anybody could have done it, right, and sent it out to the association. And that's the bizarre part. Not only are the FDA and the CDC not looking into this, but even the associations themselves. If they don't want to trust me, a retired Air Force major, they could have done their own surveys with their own people, right, and asked the same questions, but they haven't. It's really bizarre, isn't it, that nobody seems to want to talk about this, even though they know it's happening. Like I said, it's happening. These things are not rare. They're in, like I said, 20 to 30% of dead bodies. And it does make you wonder what percentage of the living population are walking around right now with these things, forming inside them. Even if it's only 5% of the population, that's still 15 million Americans. This is a huge thing going on.
Yeah. And, it'll be great to see the next results that when are the next results coming out for 2025?
Well, I'm worried that we're not going to be able to do a 2026 survey at the end of this next year, because if I only had 59 responses to this last one for 2025, what do you think is going to happen? So I hate to say this, Michael, but I think maybe the only way for this thing to maybe break wide open, two different ways. One is for people like Tucker Carlson or Glenn Beck or Megyn Kelly, whose shows I've been trying to get on for the last 3 years. I'm in contact with all of them. In fact, in September 2024, I actually paid $1,600 of my own money to go meet Tucker in person at a meet and greet event when he was doing his tour around the country. He was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So I went that night. He was in Hershey, and I gave him a violet clots. I held it up to him. First of all, I said, Tucker, let me introduce you to the most spectacular side effect of the COVID-19 vaccines. And he said, is this for real? I said, it's for real, Tucker. Then he said, I'm glad I didn't take the shot. But that wasn't enough, right? He should have had me on his show. I gave him a vial of clots to keep. I gave another vial just like this to his producer, Samantha, who was there that night, as well as my contact information. Crickets, Michael. They had not contacted me about coming on Tucker's show to talk about this, despite the fact that I have all this evidence, with video of embalmers at the Tennessee convention raising their hands. I have the names of well-respected embalmers and presidents of funeral director associations, state funeral director associations, saying they're seeing the clots. I've got all this evidence, But Megyn Kelly also, her booker Allison Jordan's, they've turned me down several times to come on the show, despite the fact that Megyn herself was injured by the vaccines. Exactly. She has an autoimmune disease caused by the COVID vaccines. Yet she does not want to have me on her show. Isn't that bizarre? It's bizarre.
Well, you did go on Redacted, and I think that's great. He's got almost 3 million subscribers.
Yeah, I've also done Cheryl Atkinson's Full Measure TV show. But that's been several years ago. I also was on Del Bigtree's The High Wire, along with embalmer Richard Hirschman.
Very good.
Yanya Kellick from the Epic Times. I did an hour-long sit-down American thought leaders with Jan. I was in D.C. for one of the hearings with Senator Johnson. And then after the hearing was over, myself, Edward Dowd, Jessica Rose, we went down the street to the Epic Times headquarters, and we all did interviews that same day with Yanya Kellick. So, I've been on other, for example, my interview with John Campbell, the older gentleman in the UK who runs a YouTube channel. Yep. One of my very first interviews with John, Michael, got 2.2 million views and had over 27,000 comments to it. And if you go through those 27,000 comments, you see comment after comment from people, either themselves or a loved one or friend they know, talking about their vaccine injury and the clots they developed and other ailments.
That's what I saw when I talked about you and your information on my show just recently. The comments were like over the top, and there was a lot. I get 40, 50,000 maybe, and they really came in and watched that. They were enthralled by that. So
what's fun is, I take all the comments that come in, even the naysayers, and there's always a couple naysayers in these that say, oh, these clots aren't happening. Some of them will claim the clots have always existed. Well, that's wrong, because Dr. Campbell, for example, has all these old pathology books. And if you look through all the books, you see the grape jelly clots, traditional grape jelly clots. You see the traditional chicken fat clots. You don't see these in there. You can't find them in there. So there was a case back in the late 1980s, early 1990s of a syndrome called white clot syndrome, which is interesting. There were white clots that were similar to these that were happening for a few years. It turned out that those white clots were being driven by the anticoagulant drug heparin.
Right.
And the culprit in the heparin seemed to be sulfur. There was too much sulfur in the heparin, so they reduced the strength of the sulfur, and then that problem went away. Well, these particular clots, like I said, they're being driven by the element phosphorus. Well, guess what? Phosphorus just happens to sit right next to sulfur on the periodic table and has a lot of the same bonding properties. In fact, it actually outcompetes sulfur for bonding with things like fibrinogen. So that's just further evidence that this is being driven, like I said, by the element phosphorus as well as the element sulfur. So, like I said, the evidence we have is overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely. So, Tom, how can people reach you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, they can go to our free Substack. We don't charge any money for it. We're not grifters. I'm not writing a book. We're not, So this is a free Substack. We call it Clotastrophy, as you mentioned earlier. And they can find that at Laura, Laura, Kasner, Kasner, .substack.com. LauraKasner.substack.com. They can also contact me at ThomasHaviland at sbcglobal.net, especially if you're an embalmer or a vascular surgeon, cardiologist, endovascular specialist. I would love to talk to you about pulling these things out of both the dead and the living. Absolutely. We're always looking for new people to want to come forward. Yeah.
And this is great. You're reaching out and doing these shows like that, because it'll start to get people, more secure about, coming out and revealing, just like you did with, just to the general public. And you had, tons of response from the general public. So maybe some, general public type surveys, more of those. And, I would love to help, help you with anything that you want to push out. So, and we'll definitely put the, your links down in the description box so that people can contact you or reach out. So, Tom, absolutely incredible show. Great reveals. I've been looking for this information for so long, and you're bringing it big. So good luck in the future. Hopefully we get more people responding. You get some of those high level shows. It seems to be when people come on my show, they go big. So hopefully this happens.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Michael, for having me. And by the way, I want to give people a little bit of hope. Dr. Peter McCullough and others are coming up with protocols like the nattokinase bromelain curcumin protocol, which helps clear the body of the spike protein, which is causing these clots and a lot of this other damage. Like I said, unfortunately, once these things form, though, that's you can't break them down, not even with big clot busting drugs like tissue plasminogen activator. Doctors then, like I said, that Dr. Mohamed Bashir, who works in that cath lab, that's when he has to go in flexible catheters that suck the clot out, scrape it out, or lasso and pull it out. So, but we want to give people hope that the trick is not to have these things form in the first place by detoxing your body of the damaging spike protein.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, all of those people that contributed to this, we want to make it so that, maybe they're not held accountable on the level that many of them think they will be. If they're, forced into pretty much like a lot of people were, and pushing it. I think maybe we should, show that they're going to not be held accountable. Just come out and reveal, and then help us, overcome this. And you're going to be a hero instead of a zero. So.
Exactly. Yeah. We have to consider maybe giving some amnesty to doctors and funeral directors and embalmers so they get more vocal about this. That's a fine-edged sword, though, because, if these people had spoken out earlier, we wouldn't be in this situation. And there's a lot of people who have dead loved ones or severely injured loved ones who aren't going to be too happy about giving amnesty to somebody who stayed silent and was a coward.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. But it's, there's a lot of people out there that have sinned, and, who hasn't, we have to like give them, the ones that are less culpable, some kind of leeway. Otherwise we're going to be like millions of people are going to be held accountable, and we just can't have that. So
Agreed. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Tom, and a fantastic show again, and look forward to your success in the future and revealing all this information.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.